The moment a person begins to love themselves, they begin to decay. Loving oneself. Today, this phrase sounds almost harmless. It is presented as a cornerstone of psychological healing, printed on the first pages of self-help books, repeated endlessly in polished quotes across social media. It is treated as something unquestionably good. But if Dostoyevsky had heard this phrase, he would likely have flinched. Because in his world, loving oneself is not the first step toward healing. It is often the first step toward decay. Why is that? Is self-love truly possible, or is it simply a defense invented by a consciousness that cannot endure pain for too long? Now ask yourself this. When you say, "I love myself," what are you actually loving? The person you are right now, with all your contradictions? Or the idea of who you wish you were? Or perhaps you are whispering this phrase only to silence the discomfort you feel toward yourself. This question is unsettling because it places us directly inside an inner conflict. On one side, the desire to escape ourselves. On the other, the necessity of staying with ourselves. Dostoyevsky's characters live inside this fracture. And if we are honest, we probably do too. A person comes closest to themselves in solitude. When the noise fades, when the world feels distant, when you believe no one is watching, and you finally hear your inner voice clearly for the first time. That voice is rarely gentle. It judges. It accuses. It humiliates. According to Dostoyevsky, the relationship a person has with themselves almost never resembles pure love. It is closer to a reckoning, an ongoing trial with no final verdict. The accused, the judge, and the executioner are the same person. The idea of loving oneself tries to close this case prematurely, but the file is never truly closed. For Dostoyevsky, the human being is fundamentally contradictory. We desire goodness and choose destruction at the same time. We long for innocence while feeding on guilt. To love oneself, then, would mean loving this darkness as well. But can a person really do that? Or is what we call self-love simply an attempt to hide what we do not want to see? Self-love is often presented as self-forgiveness. Yet for Dostoyevsky, forgiveness is not something that comes from avoiding confrontation. It is a heavy form of awareness earned by passing directly through pain. Think of the narrator in Notes from Underground. He despises himself, yet he clings to that hatred. He even protects it. He sanctifies his pain, because pain, for him, is proof of existence. He rejects self-love precisely because he knows it would silence the questions that keep him awake. And once those questions are silenced, only a numb version of the self remains. In Dostoyevsky's world, the moment a person becomes comfortable, they begin to disappear. Comfort is the enemy of consciousness. And self-love is often the modern name we give to that comfort. This idea creates discomfort because we have been told the opposite for so long. We were taught that if you do not love yourself, no one else will. That happiness requires being at peace with yourself. Dostoyevsky looks at this belief from another angle. To be at peace with oneself, he suggests, often requires lying to oneself. Because the human interior is not neat or orderly enough to sustain peace for very long. Inside us live suppressed desires, fears, envy, resentment, and shame. Self-love often attempts to cover this chaos with a single warm sentence. Is that necessarily wrong? Perhaps not, but it is dangerous. Because when a person declares self-love, they risk abandoning self-examination altogether. Dostoyevsky's characters never stop questioning themselves. They exist inside questions that tear them apart. Raskolnikov's crime, for example, is not merely murder. His deeper crime is believing himself to be exceptional, above others, entitled to transgress. This is a narcissistic form of self-love, one that elevates the self beyond moral limits. And this sense of justification is what ultimately destroys him. Raskolnikov does not kill because he loves himself. He kills because he believes he is right. And here Dostoyevsky whispers something unsettling. The line between self-love and self-exaltation is dangerously thin. Most people never notice when they cross it. In the name of self-compassion, they quietly place themselves in the position of God. They center their own suffering so completely that the rest of the world falls silent. That is why, In Dostoyevsky's universe, salvation does not come from loving the self, but from breaking it open. At this point, an inner reckoning begins. For some people, self-love has been the only way to survive. Those who refuse it risk becoming dependent on the love of others, dissolving themselves in external approval. Dostoyevsky does not deny this reality, but his concern lies elsewhere. He suggests that a person can live a meaningful life without loving themselves. Sometimes, refusing self-love even makes a person more authentic, because the feeling of inadequacy propels movement. The illusion of completeness brings everything to a halt. In Dostoyevsky, deficiency is not a flaw. It is the condition of an awakened consciousness. Only when a person feels that something is missing do they begin to think, to question, to encounter their own darkness. The idea of self-love often tries to fill this absence too quickly, because lack is uncomfortable. It isolates us with ourselves. Yet for Dostoyevsky, the most dangerous moment is not despair, but peace. Peace suspends thought. When thinking stops, a person slowly stops being themselves. That is why his characters are rarely calm, rarely balanced, rarely good. Goodness, in his work, is often a shallow harmony. Depth is born from conflict. When someone loves themselves, they often mute the inner struggle. When they try to understand themselves, they fall directly into it and lose the ability to escape. At this stage, love is no longer sufficient. Courage is required. Loving oneself is a warm phrase. Understanding oneself is a cold confrontation. Dostoyevsky chooses the cold, because, to him, true consciousness emerges only when a person realizes there is no escape from themselves. Consciousness is not a reward, it is a burden, heavy to carry, almost impossible to put down. This is why self-love is never a final goal in Dostoyevsky's world. More often, it is a distraction. Declaring love for oneself allows uncomfortable questions to be postponed. Questions like, why am I this way? Why do I repeat the same mistake? Am I genuinely good, or do I only want to appear that way? These questions dissolve beneath affirmations, but Dostoyevsky wants them to survive, because what defines a human being is not the answers they settle on, but the questions they refuse to silence. At the heart of Dostoyevsky's thinking lies a disturbing idea, that human beings do not simply suffer despite their awareness, but often because of it, and sometimes even choose that suffering. Consciousness, in his world, is not a gift meant to bring peace, but a condition that makes peace nearly impossible. A person who truly sees themselves cannot remain comfortable for long. This is why Dostoyevsky mistrusts any philosophy that promises inner harmony too easily. Self-love, when offered as a universal cure, risks becoming another way of dulling consciousness. It teaches the individual to soften their edges, to reinterpret pain until it feels productive, manageable, even empowering. But Dostoyevsky is not interested in productive pain. He is interested in honest pain. Pain that does not ask to be redeemed or reframed. Pain that simply exists and demands to be acknowledged. In this sense, loving oneself can become a subtle act of control, an attempt to manage one's inner chaos rather than to face it. The human mind, he suggests, is capable of immense cruelty toward itself, but also immense self-deception. And self-love, if adopted too quickly, can slide from compassion into avoidance. Instead of asking, why does this hurt? The person learns to say, I deserve kindness, and the question quietly disappears. Yet for Dostoyevsky, questions are sacred. They are signs of a mind still alive, still resisting simplification. He does not believe humans are meant to resolve themselves into a stable, coherent whole. On the contrary, he sees fragmentation as the natural state of being conscious. To exist is to be divided. To think is to suffer that division. Any promise that seeks to heal this split too neatly becomes suspicious. That is why his characters often sabotage their own happiness, reject easy solutions, and cling to contradictions that seem irrational from the outside. They sense, often without articulating it, that losing inattention would mean losing themselves. Self-love, in this context, is not rejected because it is immoral, but because it is insufficient. It offers relief without transformation. It soothes without revealing. And for Dostoyevsky, what does not reveal ultimately diminishes the human spirit. A person may feel better, function better, even appear healthier, but something essential has gone quiet inside them. The restless voice that once asked dangerous questions has been replaced by a calm reassurance. And Dostoyevsky would ask, at what cost? Because a life without inner struggle may be easier to endure, but it may also be less real. And perhaps the most unsettling possibility he leaves us with is this: that many of us do not want truth as much as we want comfort, and that we often call this comfort loving ourselves. Here, freedom takes on a different meaning. In modern language, freedom often means being at peace with oneself. For Dostoyevsky, freedom means refusing to deny one's darkness, not fleeing from it. Self-love often smooths that darkness, softens its edges, makes it tolerable. But once the darkness is polished away, only a faint, shallow self remains. That is Dostoyevsky's deepest fear. People who are faint. People who flee pain, avoid depth, and suppress their inner tragedy with comforting phrases. Because suppressed tragedy does not disappear. It only becomes quieter and more dangerous. That is why Dostoyevsky's idea of salvation has less to do with acceptance and more to do with refusal. Refusal to lie to oneself. People do not break because they hate themselves. They break because they deceive themselves. Perhaps this is why Dostoyevsky's characters speak endlessly to themselves. They engage in constant inner monologues, but they rarely offer themselves comfort. Comfort is a temporary anesthetic. Dostoyevsky chooses wakefulness. He chooses pain. He prefers the sharp cold of self-questioning to the warmth of self-approval. Because only when a person feels cold, he believes, do they truly feel alive. Here, you may recognize something familiar. You may remember how often you have used the phrase love yourself as a shield. How you hid behind it when you failed, when you hurt others, when you left things unfinished. The moments when you said, this is just who I am, and quietly stopped thinking. Dostoyevsky is merciless here, but not condemning. He simply asks one question: is the version of yourself that you love actually you? For Dostoyevsky, the most dangerous people are not those who commit evil, but those who feel complete. Completeness is the end of questioning. When questioning ends, conscience falls silent, inattention dissolves, and awareness grows dull. Without that tension, a person loses the ability to understand others, because they no longer hear their own confusion. And perhaps the final question remains, unanswered on purpose. If loving yourself means never truly confronting yourself, which one do you really choose?